North Korea claims to have conducted its first successful test of a long-range missile, suggesting it now has the capability to hit a target anywhere in the world. Pyongyang says today's missile reached an altitude of 2,800 kilometers, supposedly 5 times higher than the International Space Station. South Korea's military says it traveled more than 930 kilometers before falling into the Sea of Japan. By definition, an intercontinental missile has a minimum range of 5,500 kilometers. And in case you're wondering, this is believed to be the 11th missile test carried out by the rogue communist nation this year. Well, for more on this, let's turn to Andrea Berger. She's a senior research associate at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies and an expert in North Korea. She joins me live from New York. Thank you for being with us, Andrea. Now, North Korea has claimed it has successfully launched this long-range missile. Does the regime have the capacity and the technology to do that?
Well, North Korea's claimed that this is an intercontinental ballistic missile that can hit anywhere in the world. And while we believe the first part of that statement is true, probably the latter part of it isn't yet. This is something that would be greater than the range we define as 5,500 kilometers, as you mentioned. And that might bring North Korea within striking distance of Alaska, but it doesn't take it to the point of being able to strike targets in other parts of the continental United States. That said, it is a big technical milestone for North Korea and a stepping stone to the technology that would allow North Korea to do that. And for that reason, we have a lot of grounds to be concerned.
And now you mentioned that there are some indicators to show that it is at least partially true. So what kind of threats could this pose to the U.S.? You mentioned striking distance to Alaska, not necessarily to the continental U.S.
That's right. The threat that this poses is really that North Korea is much closer to being able to attain the capability to have an ICBM that reaches at much further ranges. So, as I mentioned, stepping stone to a much bigger issue. That said, it's also a threat to the viability of current U.S. policy. Donald Trump's approach has been at least rhetorically, to say that he will prevent a North Korean ICBM from happening. And today, North Korea has rendered that policy invalid.
Now, what about the timing? It seems that it's interesting that this testing of this missile was on July 4th or around July 4th.
Yeah, North Korea's tested on the 4th of July a number of times before. It often tests on weekends or U.S. holidays. That's not uncommon. And indeed probably is something of a political signal that it has achieved this milestone on a day of such importance to the United States. It really does seem to be quite the direct affront to U.S. policy.
And what sort of an endgame, then, does that mean when you're trying to prove this on an important day to the United States?
Well, for the North Koreans, the attainment of functional operational deterrent capability that can keep the U.S. back from conflict, keep the U.S. from attempting to use military force against North Korea, whether that be for regime change purposes or otherwise, is a national priority. And Kim Jong-un, as the leader of that country, has come in and very much hit the gas pedal on nuclear and missile development efforts for precisely that reason.
And as I'm sure you're aware, the U.S. president has already responded through tweets. And here's what he had to say. North Korea has just launched another missile. Does this guy have anything better to do with his life? Hard to believe that South Korea and Japan will put up with this much longer. Perhaps China will put a heavy move on North Korea and end the nonsense for once and for all. So what do you make of that response from the U.S. president? Seemingly, he's referring to this guy as Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, it doesn't seem from that set of tweets that Trump has appreciated the technical importance of the launch. It also seems to imply that he still believes that there's a change of policy coming from China. And this is the perennial discussion. It's been a discussion since the early 1990s when U.S. policy has been to wait for China to finally crack down on North Korea and bring it to heel. And I think many analysts feel that that is an increasingly unlikely possibility, and Trump perhaps has yet to come to the same conclusion.
And now just one final question for you. You led security talks under Kim Jong-un, really at the start of his leadership. So can China still have its influence over the young leader in North Korea as it used to?
That's a great question. And in the outreach that we had to North Koreans in previous years, it was apparent that both ends of the North Korea-China relationship are frustrated with one another. Kim Jong-un has really not held back at all from completely setting fire to that relationship. And on the Chinese side, Chinese officials are also increasingly vocal that they feel North Korea is disrespectful and problematic to the region. That said, that doesn't necessarily fundamentally alter China's thinking on how to promote stability in its region, and it sees that as being a strategy that should be oriented around dialogue, interdependence in economic terms, rather than sanctions and confrontation as advocated by Washington at this moment.
Well, Andrea, we really appreciate your analysis on this issue. Andrea Berger, Senior Research Associate at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. We reached her in New York, and we're back in just a moment.